The silver of the Morse code key clicked one last time, a frantic, stuttering pulse that bypassed the logic of the radio room and tapped directly into the primal fear of anyone listening across the Malacca Strait. It wasn't a standard distress call. It was a fragmented confession of the impossible. All officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. There was a pause, a heavy silence that stretched across the frequencies, and then, a final, chilling postscript, I die. When the Silver Star arrived at the coordinates, they didn't find a battle or a storm. They found a ship perfectly intact, drifting through a calm sea, manned entirely by corpses. Every man on the Ourang Medan was frozen in a state of absolute terror, their eyes wide open, teeth bared, and arms reaching out toward an invisible attacker that had left no physical trace. There were no wounds, no blood, and no signs of a struggle. Just a crew of 32 men who had looked at something so horrifying that their hearts simply stopped. This is the anatomical breakdown of a ghost ship that technically never existed, a vessel that erased itself from maritime records the moment it was pulled into the depths, leaving behind a forensic puzzle that defies every law of biology and physics. In June of 1947, the waters off the coast of Malaysia were a graveyard of post-war secrets. The world was transitioning from the visible horrors of global conflict to the invisible tensions of the Cold War. It was in this volatile atmosphere that the distress signals began. Two American ships, the City of Exeter and the Silver Star, picked up the frantic transmissions. The voice on the other end wasn't calling for a tow or reporting a mechanical failure, it was announcing a mass expiration. The speed at which the crew of the Ourang Medan was dying suggested a biological or chemical event, yet the final transmission indicated that the radio operator was the last one standing, watching his world turn into a morgue in real time. By the time the Silver Star spotted the Dutch freighter drifting in the distance, the sun was high, and the sea was glass. There was no smoke, no fire, and no distress flares. From the outside, the Ourang Medan looked like any other merchant vessel. But as the boarding party from the Silver Star climbed the side of the hull, the temperature seemed to drop, despite the tropical heat. The first body they found was on the bridge. It was the captain. He wasn't slumped over his desk or tucked away in a corner. He was standing, his back against the bulkhead, his hands clawed into the air as if trying to push away an encroaching shadow. His face was a mask of agony. His eyes were bulging, staring at a point just above the horizon where nothing existed. Moving deeper into the ship, the boarding party found the officers in the chart room, their bodies scattered like discarded dolls, each one bearing the same expression of paralyzed fright. Even the ship's dog, a small terrier, was found dead on the deck, its mouth open in a silent snarl, its legs stiffened in mid-stride. There was a pervasive sense of wrongness that transcended the presence of death. There were no bullet holes. There was no evidence of poisoning in the galley. The food was untouched, the water supply was clean, and the engines were in perfect working order. Whatever killed these men didn't want the ship, it wanted their lives, and it took them with surgical, terrifying precision. The mystery of the Ourang Medan begins with its name. In the aftermath of the event, researchers combed through the Lloyd's shipping register. They checked the records of the Dutch East Indies. They looked for any mention of a freighter by that name registered in 1947. They found nothing. The ship was a phantom, a vessel that moved through the world's most heavily monitored shipping lanes without a single piece of official paperwork. This lack of documentation points toward a reality far more dangerous than a simple maritime accident. In the years following World War II, the transport of Unit 731 bioweapons and confiscated nerve agents was a frequent, albeit clandestine, occurrence. If the Ourang Medan was carrying a cargo that didn't exist on any manifest, its sudden transformation into a floating tomb begins to follow a dark, logical path. The cargo holds were sealed, but the boarding party reported a strange, sweet smell emanating from the depths of the ship, a scent that grew stronger as they approached the lower decks. The forensic anomaly of the bodies cannot be overstated. In a typical case of asphyxiation or carbon monoxide poisoning, the muscles relax after death. The faces go slack. But the men of the Ourang Medan were locked in rigor mortis the moment they expired. This suggests a massive, localized trauma to the nervous system, or perhaps something even more esoteric. Some theorists point toward an underwater release of methane gas, a burp from the ocean floor that could have risen up and enveloped the ship, suffocating the crew instantly. However, methane doesn't explain the look of sheer, unadulterated horror on their faces. It doesn't explain why they were all looking in the same direction. It doesn't explain the final radio transmission, which implies a slow, creeping realization of doom rather than a sudden cloud of gas. The operator had enough time to see his friends die, to contemplate his own end, and to send a message that would haunt the maritime world for the next century. As the Silver Star attempted to tow the ghost ship back to port, the mystery took its final, violent turn. Just as the tow lines were secured, a thick, black smoke began to pour out of the Ourang Medan's No. 4 cargo hold. There had been no fire reported by the boarding party, no sparks, and no electrical failures. Yet, within seconds, the ship was engulfed in an inferno that burned with an unnatural, blue-white intensity. The crew of the Silver Star was forced to cut the lines and watch as the vessel that held all the answers was ripped apart by a series of massive explosions. The Ourang Medan didn't just sink, it vanished, plunging into the 5,000-foot depths of the Malacca Strait, taking its cargo and its corpses with it. Within minutes, the surface of the water was clear. No debris, no oil slick, no evidence that 32 men had just been incinerated in the middle of the ocean. This sudden destruction suggests a failsafe. If the ship was indeed carrying something it shouldn't have been, specifically, potassium cyanide or nitroglycerin that had become unstable due to seawater leakage, the fire was an inevitability. But the timing was too perfect. It was as if the ship refused to be salvaged, choosing instead to delete itself from the physical world. For decades, the story was dismissed as an urban legend, a sea yarn told by bored sailors. But in 1952, a series of declassified CIA documents surfaced, mentioning the Ourang Medan by name. The documents didn't provide answers, they asked questions. They revealed that the intelligence community was just as baffled, and terrified, by the event as the public. They were looking for the invisible killer, the force that could turn a state-of-the-art freighter into a silent graveyard in the span of a few minutes. The analytical mind must look at the location. The Malacca Strait is one of the most geologically active regions on Earth. It is a place where the crust of the planet is thin, and the secrets of the deep often bubble to the surface. But the natural disaster theory fails to account for the human element. The radio operator's distress call was structured. It was a report. He was documenting a catastrophe. If the crew was dying of a gas leak, why go to the bridge? Why stand against the wall and scream at the air? The positioning of the body suggests an external threat, something that moved through the ship like a physical entity. This leads to the most controversial theory of all, that the Ourang Medan encountered something that wasn't of this world, or perhaps, something that had been dormant in the ocean for millennia and was disturbed by the ship's passing. When we examine the 80% of factual evidence, we see a pattern of high-stakes smuggling. Post-war Japan was a hub for chemical research that the Allied forces were eager to secure. It is highly probable that the Ourang Medan was a black-bottom ship, a vessel used to move experimental materials from hidden labs in China or Japan to secret facilities in the West. If the containers in Hold 4 were damaged, the resulting leak would create a cocktail of lethal gases. But nerve agents like sarin or tabun don't cause the eyes to bulge in terror, they cause convulsions and rapid loss of consciousness. The horror factor remains the outlier. It is the 20% of the narrative that refuses to be solved by chemistry. It suggests that the crew didn't just die, they were witness to something that broke their understanding of reality. As we look deeper into the shadows of 1947, we find that the Silver Star's logbooks were suspiciously altered. The names of the boarding party were never released. The official report from the United States Coast Guard in 1954 acknowledged the incident but provided no conclusion, effectively closing the case on a mystery that was never officially opened. Every piece of data we uncover leads to a new contradiction. If the ship didn't exist, how did the Silver Star find it? If it did exist, who owned it? And why, in the 70 years since it sank, has no salvage team ever attempted to locate the wreck? The Ourang Medan sits at the intersection of conspiracy and nightmare, a reminder that the ocean doesn't just hide ships, it hides the reasons why they never came home. We are left staring at the same empty space the captain was looking at, trying to see the invisible killer before it sees us. The silence following the final explosion of the Ourang Medan was not just the absence of sound, but the presence of a void. When the Silver Star's crew retreated, they weren't just fleeing a sinking ship, they were escaping a psychological contagion. The psychological trauma reported by the boarding party members, who were never officially interviewed but whose stories leaked through maritime bars in Singapore and Hong Kong, suggested that the horror on the faces of the dead wasn't just a physical reaction to a toxin. It was a reflection. Every man who stepped onto that deck felt an overwhelming urge to jump overboard, a crushing sense of despair that seemed to radiate from the very steel of the hull. This brings us to the frequency theory, a logical pivot that bridges the gap between the supernatural and the scientific. It is well documented that certain low-frequency sounds, known as infrasound, can induce feelings of dread, nausea, and even hallucinations in humans. If the Ourang Medan had suffered a structural failure in its hull that caused it to vibrate at a specific, subaudible frequency, the crew wouldn't have known they were being attacked. They would have simply begun to lose their minds, perceiving shadows where there were none, and feeling a heart-stopping terror that had no visible source. But infrasound doesn't kill 32 men simultaneously. It doesn't freeze them in rigor mortis. This leads us back to the cargo hold and the Unit 731 connection. The Japanese biological warfare unit was known for experimenting with electric nerve agents, chemicals designed to cause massive, instantaneous muscle contractions. If such a substance were being transported in the heat of the Malacca Strait, the pressure could have caused a microscopic leak. A colorless, odorless mist would have drifted through the ventilation system, hitting every deck at once. The crew wouldn't have had time to gasp. Their nervous systems would have misfired, sending a signal to every muscle in their bodies to contract at maximum force. This would explain the bared teeth, the clawed hands, and the bulging eyes. They weren't looking at a ghost, they were experiencing the total catastrophic failure of their own biology. Yet, the mystery deepens when we examine the Silver Star itself. Why was an American merchant vessel the only one to respond so quickly? Records indicate the Silver Star was miles off its charted course. Some researchers suggest the Silver Star wasn't a coincidental rescuer, but a shadow vessel, tasked with monitoring the Ourang Medan's illegal journey. If the rescue was actually a recovery mission gone wrong, the decision to cut the tow lines and watch the ship explode starts to look less like a panic move and more like a tactical sanitization. If the Americans realized the cargo was compromised and lethal, they couldn't risk bringing it to a civilian port. The explosion in hold number 4 might not have been an accident, it might have been a scuttling charge, triggered to ensure the evidence remained 5,000 feet below the surface. The cold truth of the Ourang Medan is buried under layers of post-war bureaucracy. In 1959, an investigator named C.H. Mark Jr. tracked down a survivor, or so he claimed. A man in Germany purportedly confessed to being the last man on the ship, a stowaway who escaped in a lifeboat and watched the crew die. His account mentioned leaking cylinders and a greenish mist. But this man disappeared before his testimony could be verified, leaving behind only a self-published pamphlet that was quickly suppressed. Was he a witness, or a plant designed to provide a logical explanation for an event that the authorities wanted forgotten? Every time a lead appears, it vanishes into a fog of disinformation. We must also consider the methane hydrate hypothesis. The Malacca Strait sits atop massive deposits of frozen methane. A shift in the tectonic plates could have released a death cloud, a bubble of gas so concentrated it would displace all oxygen around the ship. As the gas rose through the hull, it would have suffocated everyone instantly. This would explain the dog's sudden death and the captain's frozen stance. However, methane is highly flammable. If a gas cloud had enveloped the ship, the mere act of the radio operator sending a distress call, creating a tiny electrical spark in the transmitter, would have turned the entire vessel into a fireball instantly. But the ship didn't explode until hours later, when the Silver Star arrived. This timing gap effectively kills the natural gas theory. The most chilling piece of evidence remains the I-die transmission. Morse code is a deliberate act. It requires a functioning mind and a steady hand. If the operator was dying of nerve gas or suffocation, his coordination would have been the first thing to go. Yet, the message was clear. It suggests that he was the last one alive not by chance, but by design. He was left to witness the aftermath, to walk through the corridors of his dead friends, and to realize that there was no escape. The information gap here is the why. Why did the killer, be it chemical, biological, or something else, leave one man alive just long enough to tell the world? It feels less like an accident and more like a warning. As we synthesize the facts, the 80% reality points toward a black site transport. The Ourang Medan was likely a ghost ship in the literal sense, unregistered, unmanned by any official navy, and carrying a cargo so volatile that its mere existence was a war crime. The 20% of atmosphere, the terror, the invisible shadow, the blue-white fire, is the byproduct of a technology or a phenomenon we still don't fully grasp. Whether it was a botched chemical recovery or a brush with a localized atmospheric anomaly, the result was the same, the total erasure of 32 lives. The final reveal lies in the silence of the Dutch government. For a nation so meticulous with its maritime records, their absolute refusal to acknowledge a ship named Ourang Medan is the loudest piece of evidence we have. You don't delete a ship unless its story threatens the foundation of your international standing. The Ourang Medan wasn't a victim of the sea, it was a victim of the secrets it carried. It remains the ultimate maritime forensic puzzle, a ship that died of fright, carrying a cargo of nightmares, into a grave of official silence. We are left on the shore, looking at the horizon, wondering if the same invisible killer is still drifting out there, waiting for the next ship to cross its path.